Cleopatra the Seventh Philopator is most known as the Egyptian queen, who successfully wooed and captivated two powerful and famous men of Rome. Both history and Hollywood are rife with tales about her relationship with Julius Caesar, which came first, and then her epic love affair with Mark Antony, which came next. Cleopatra, on the other hand, was the female ruler of a nation that was falling into disrepair and was up against the menacing ambitions of an empire that was expanding. This indicates that Cleopatra's relationships should not be viewed as simple romances, but rather with a greater focus on the pragmatic aspects of the situation. In the end, it's possible that Cleopatra didn't have much of a choice but to connect herself with the people she saw as the most important personalities in Egypt's and her own continued existence. Cleopatra the Seventh, Pharaoh of Egypt. Cleopatra was born in the year 69 BCE, at a period in which Roman military and political influence in the Mediterranean was on the rise. At the same time, Egypt, which was ruled at the time by the Greek Ptolemaic dynasty, was experiencing a drop in power as well as a loss of geographical control. Cleopatra succeeded to the throne at the age of 18, sharing it with her co-ruler and half-brother, Ptolemy the 13th. Together, they were the leaders of a nation that was already significantly influenced by Rome. Although history is all too quick to concentrate on her age in contrast to that of her husband-brother, he was 8 years her junior, it frequently skips over the issue of a young female ruler seeking to legitimate her leadership over a nation that is highly impacted by the external inputs of a foreign power. This is despite the fact that history is all too keen to dwell on her age in comparison to that of her husband-brother. Despite this, there is evidence that Cleopatra soon divorced her husband and took total control of Egypt when he died. The foundation for Roman engagement in Egyptian affairs was already established in the year 58 BCE, when Cleopatra's older sister, Berenice IV, launched a revolt against her father, Ptolemy IV, who had been reinstated as king with Roman help. This event marked the beginning of Roman involvement in Egyptian politics. An opportunistic Roman may have seen the internal conflict that erupted between Cleopatra and her half-brother and their followers as the ideal opportunity to advance his own agenda. How Julius Caesar came to support Cleopatra. When the fleeing Queen Cleopatra appealed for assistance in fighting a civil war against Ptolemy the 13th, Julius Caesar was 52 years old, while Cleopatra was only 21 years old. The gambit that Cleopatra played was successful. Caesar took Cleopatra's side after realizing that Ptolemy the 13th was to blame for the death of Pompey, and that a loss for Ptolemy would allow Caesar to expand his political influence in the Eastern Mediterranean if Ptolemy were to be defeated. Even while the infamous love affair that was quickly initiated could have been real, there is sufficient evidence to suggest that it was more political in character. The majority of the writings that characterize Cleopatra as the prostitute queen, or meretrix regina, are written from the point of view of Western or Roman male authors. In point of fact, contemporary Egyptian sources, as well as subsequent sources from the Eastern Mediterranean, show a quite different picture. Cleopatra is referred to as Cleopatra the Wise in a Greek treatise that was written during the time when she was being instructed by Camarius, who was both a high priest and a philosopher. Although there is some debate as to whether or not it is based on the historical Cleopatra, the sources that focus on her intelligence, scientific mind, gift with languages, and even philosophical education are more prevalent than descriptions of her physical appearance or the sweetness in the tones of her voice. Cleopatra may have been the seductress represented in Roman texts, but Caesar's more self-assured and autocratic personality was fully complicit in such a coupling, if not the more dominating one. In addition, Cleopatra's call for assistance in such a predicament would have been the more vulnerable position to take. Was it a love story? At this point, it is not possible to determine whether the connection was the product of a true love affair, the intrigues of a desperate queen, or a chance for both parties to promote their careers. The period spent by Caesar and Cleopatra at Alexandria may have resulted in the birth of their son, Ptolemy XV Caesarion. Caesar also meddled personally in Egyptian matters by insisting that Ptolemy and Cleopatra appear before him so that he could pass judgment on them. This is most definitely not an indication that a man is succumbing to the cunning of a woman. Both Suetonius and Appian mention how brief this whirlwind relationship was, suggesting that it may have lasted for little more than 38 days at the most. Appian goes as far as to suggest that Caesar, in company with Cleopatra and enjoying himself with her in other ways, and that she would have had him stay longer in Egypt if he had let her to do so. Cleopatra made her way to Rome in the year 46 BCE, where she was greeted with honors and accompanied by Ptolemy XIV, the man she considered to be her second husband, but who Caesar did not appear to disapprove of. She was venerated with statues at the temple of Venus Genitrix, which was located on the grounds of Caesar's home. Cleopatra was also in Rome at the assassination of Julius Caesar in 44 BCE, and this eventually led to her becoming involved with Mark Antony, who was a member of Rome's second triumvirate. The love affair of Cleopatra and Mark Antony. The narrative of Mark Antony and Cleopatra's affair is one that is filled with both tragedy and foolishness, a helpful model for theater, as demonstrated by William Shakespeare's adaptation of it, as well as the adaptations of several future authors and Hollywood directors, most notably in George Bernard Shaw's Caesar and Cleopatra and Joseph L. Mankiewicz's Cleopatra. Octavian, who would eventually become Augustus, made the relationship between the two leaders the focus of a propagandist smear campaign, which demonized Cleopatra and resulted to Mark Antony's reputation being assassinated. Cleopatra was also a victim of this effort. When Cleopatra first encountered Antony in Tarsus in the year 41 BCE, she was a more experienced, perhaps more self-assured and well-traveled queen who had already been successful in enlisting assistance from the Romans. According to Plutarch, who bases his beliefs on earlier sources, Antony initially sent for Cleopatra to question her about her alleged backing of Gaius Cassius in prior conflicts. Plutarch bases his opinions on earlier sources. Nevertheless, upon seeing her, he fell into her snare, which in some way suggests that Antony's then-wife Fulvia had conditioned him to be more susceptible to suggestion. Putting aside the fact that Plutarch's reliability as a writer is open to debate, the legitimacy of such comments is called into doubt when compared to the facts that are already known about Antony because they exhibit discrepancies. The character of Antony. Mark Antony was a skilled military commander and statesman who managed to survive the fall of the First Triumvirate despite the fact that he supported Caesar. He is known as Antony the Great. The vast majority of historical texts laud him for his conscientiousness as a military commander and his compassion for the men under his command. He is particularly commended for his pietas towards Caesar, and it is even thought that he may have occasionally succeeded in the realm of politics and administration, very unlikely to find someone with a weak will. The great love or passion that Cleopatra and Antony shared is also not well supported by the available data, because they came to the conclusion that maintaining contact was not in their best interests. They agreed among themselves to refrain from doing so for the first 3 years after their time spent together. Antony did not immediately return to Cleopatra after the death of Fulvia. Rather, he took the politically astute choice to strongly link himself with Octavian through the marriage to Octavia, Octavian's sister. Octavia was the future wife of Octavian. It wasn't until Antony's dependence on Octavian to return supplied troops began to wane that he sought a tighter relationship with Cleopatra, which she provided in addition to 3 children. Cleopatra also gave Antony 3 of her own children. This union, on the other hand, did not come without any requirements to fulfill. How Cleopatra made the best of the situation. By negotiating with Mark Antony for the revival of old Egyptian areas in exchange for supplies and cash, Cleopatra demonstrated her political strength in the relationship, which she may have garnered from her prior experience with Caesar. At this moment, Antony, who was the commander of Rome's eastern provinces, was supporting Cleopatra as an independent monarch rather than the leader of a protectorate. Cleopatra was the ruler of Egypt at the time. Additionally, their children were expected to assume responsibility for their own domains. The stage appeared to be ready. Before the standoff between Octavian and Antony was resolved, Egypt did experience a return to some of the wealth it had previously known for a period of 10 years. It is interesting to note that Cleopatra was politically so intertwined with Antony that there were no prospects for her to deepen her relationships with Octavian because of their close relationship. Additionally, it is possible that at the time it appeared that Octavian was not a primary investment because of his youth and lack of expertise, or that Antony professed that Octavian was not a primary investment. Both individuals were passionately committed to opposing ideologies in the political arena. Cleopatra's honorable suicide after Mark Antony's defeat at the Battle of Actium in 31 BCE and his own subsequent suicide demonstrated that all alternative avenues to preserve Cleopatra's monarchy and Egypt's standing in the world would have been severely depleted. This is shown by the fact that Cleopatra committed suicide. The death of a queen. The only aspect of Cleopatra's story in which ancient writers excuse her behavior is the manner in which she met her end. As suddenly as she appeared, the harmful beauty redeemed herself by passing away in a manner that was fitting for the royalty that she represented. Cleopatra may have believed that she had little choice in the matter and that this was the most honorable way for her to sacrifice herself. According to all accounts, Octavian was faced with a conundrum regarding her ongoing life. It was impossible for him to include her in his victory parade since people still remembered her sister Arsinoe IV, and he was unable to openly criticize her behavior because doing so would put a negative light on Caesar, who had recently passed away. Rome would remember her bond with his biological father in the event that the scenario presented itself. Because of this, it is impossible to conclude that Octavian played any role in her passing. Even if it can't be proven, a popular idea suggests that she was killed by a snake, specifically an asp or a cobra. This hypothesis, which Octavian endorsed, made it possible for him to show Cleopatra in his triumphal procession, which was a coup on his side. This was the case despite the fact that he had earlier concerns with such a display. Octavian had skillfully completed a propaganda effort that would cement Rome's anti-Cleopatra sentiments, and with the killing of the opposition, he had brought the campaign to a successful conclusion. How should Cleopatra be remembered? Cleopatra was a strong and capable leader in her own right, thanks to her intelligence and political skill. It is regrettable that her reputation has been reduced to that of a seductress who preys on the frailties of men. Roman writers, who could not accept that a foreign matriarchal authority could compete with Rome, were the ones who established the romanticism around her politically required love affairs. This romanticism was sustained by an empire that ruled for a long time after she had passed away. Its popularity as a sad love story has contributed much to its infamy. In point of fact, Cleopatra made an effort to revive the standing of her homeland, and as a result, Egypt was able to reclaim some of the authority it had lost. It's possible that Cleopatra's leadership qualities should be emphasized more than her supposed romantic relationships. We hope you liked this video, subscribe to the channel if you're a history addict, and please let us know about what civilization or time period we should talk about. Also, watch another video here.